Hi, everybody. Today we're going to go over how to plan the evaluation paragraphs in your Unit 4 essay. Since these will make up the bulk of your essay, it's pretty important to have a good grasp of how to do these. So I'm going to go over one and talk about some of the things that you might consider as you start planning that paragraph, some of the places where sometimes people go in the wrong direction, and that sort of thing. If you want to run one of these paragraph plans by me before you continue planning and drafting, I'm happy to look at that for you. All right. Okay, so what we want to do to get started is we always want to start with a topic sentence, because remember that topic sentence is our label for that paragraph. It tells us what goes in the paragraph, what doesn't. It's like our touchstone. And the topic sentences are essentially the framework of the body paragraphs in your essay. So I'm going to go all the way back up to where we have some of these topic sentences that I did a little lesson about. For this one, we want to mention our author's name. We want to mention what writing strategy or tool we're discussing in the paragraph, and then whether we think it's a strength or a weakness, because that's what we're doing in this essay, is evaluating the argument's strengths and weaknesses. Here's a couple others. Okay. So I think the one that I'm going to work with is this one. So to choose the one you're going to work with, maybe choose the one that you feel most confident about. It's going to get you moving. Maybe the one that you're struggling with and you need some extra help with. It's kind of up to you which one you start with. I would not start with one yet where you might need your other article, your R5, like this one. I would probably need the other article for. So you might, if you have any topic sentences that seem like you would need the other article to help support that point, put that one on the back burner for now and choose one of the ones that you could probably develop just from your authors, from your R4 information. All right, so I'm going to put this here. I already kind of have it there, but there we go. All right, it doesn't have to be that gigantic. That's better. Okay. So I'm doing the one where it says, although Forbes presents evidence from credible sources, he weakens his argument when he presents some of that evidence in a misleading way. So it's kind of, he takes away from his credibility when we see that some of his evidence is a little sketchy. All right. So what we want to look for when we put in our evidence or examples is, where are the credible sources? Where do we see him not being so credible? All right. Now, one thing that's really important here is that when we get into the evidence in this type of writing, it might not necessarily be a quote or a paraphrase from the source. Because remember, we're trying to talk about patterns that we see, kind of generalities. So a single quote might not do the job. So my example that I can say here, so see, the first part of my topic sentence says that he does present some evidence from credible sources. So I'm going to go into what evidence he has from credible sources. That's going to sort of be my setup. So instead of a specific quote, that's not really going to show that it's a credible source. I want to tell what sources he got his information from. So that's going to be more of a list of examples, right? And if we go up to, again, this is why we did this whole thing up here, credible. So he cites from some institutions that are pretty credible. He quotes from some people that are pretty credible. So these are the examples, instead of a quote or a paraphrase, that I'm going to include as my evidence here. So let's see yeah. All right. So these are my examples. Some specific people he quotes from, expert testimony, and some well-known organizations that he quotes from. All right. So the examples, this is what's in the article that I noticed. There's my evidence/example. All right. So we have my setup, example. So remember, this is anytime you're working with sources, and bringing in evidence or examples, quotes, paraphrases, anything from a source, something from you leading into it, the setup, something from you after it, the tie-in. Now, the tie-in to me is the most important part because that's where you're going to show me your thinking, all right? This is where I'm really going to see you in your paper, is in the tie-in. I mean, the topic sentences, yes, they present your opinion, but the tie-in or the discussion really explains your opinion. So what you want to do in the tie-in, let's see if I have any notes here. Well, let me go ahead and explain it over here. Here, what you want to do is explain how the example or evidence you just provided does what you say in the topic sentence. All right. So my topic sentence says that using these sources gives him credibility. All right. I'm going to say, how does using sources like these add to his credibility? That's what I'm going to do in my tie-in. So let's see. Here, I did this earlier with my class, so I have the notes already kind of here. All right, so citing the experts shows that people who understand politics and economics tend to agree with him. He also has people from both sides of the political spectrum, which helps to make his argument sound less biased. He also cites research from well-known and respected organizations. Right, so that's my tie-in. That's where I'm going to discuss how these examples do what I say here. Okay. Now the second part is where I'm going to talk about how he loses credibility with some of his misleading use of evidence. All right. So up there, that's when he says things like, most Americans don't have a college degree. So technically that's true, but it's very vague and misleading. And it's really just over 50% based on the numbers that I found, where he's leaving it very up to interpretation, maybe hoping his readers will think it's a much higher number. This part where most student debt is held by wealthier families, that also is true, but he presents it, again, in a misleading way. He's only giving kind of part of the truth. And the other side of it, which some people found in the Dynarski article, is that, yes, most of the debt is held by wealthier people, but they can actually handle it. Most of the people who are struggling with debt are in lower income. They might have a smaller chunk of the overall debt, but most of the people are in the lower income category. So he says most student debt is held by wealthier families, making it sound like they're the ones who are going to get the benefits of this program, but that's not necessarily the case. So it's true, but it's maybe not relevant. I don't know. And then the other thing, like if he said if all student debt were forgiven, it would be $1.6 trillion. I actually saw that confirmed in another source. So yeah, it's true, but this is never going to happen. Like, it's a hypothetical. Okay. So when we look kind of closely at some of this evidence that he gives and notice that he's being a little bit misleading with it, somebody who reads closely and notices that is probably going to lose some sort of trust in him, right? So even though he's citing from these pretty well-known sources, people are probably going to lose trust in him if they notice that. Sorry about that. My phone never rings, and of course it rings when I'm making a video. So anyway, that they might lose a little trust in him here. I think that's where I left off. Okay, so let's go back down to the paragraph. So he presents evidence from credible sources, but he weakens his argument, or he might lose some readers' trust. We could even say it that way. He might lose some of his readers' trust when he presents some evidence in a misleading way. Readers, that apostrophe should go after, because it's more than one reader. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to go down here. So now we have the new setup. This is where we're going to set up the second part here. That he has some evidence in a misleading, presented in a misleading way. There we go. So my examples. So remember, when you're bringing things over that are exact words from the source, please remember to include quotation marks and a citation. I'm being a little lazy here, but for you all, you should include that information because I can check it for you, right? So now again, my tie-in or my discussion is I'm explaining how these examples are doing what I say might make people lose his reader's trust. So essentially what I'll have to do down here is show how they're misleading and why that might make somebody mistrust him. Let me see. Yeah. So I just have a couple notes here. I think when I was talking about this in class, I thought that this paragraph's already getting a bit long. And I thought that this explanation might take too much space to explain, so I might leave that out. But we'll see. Okay. So how are these misleading, and why might that weaken his argument? And so it's like, why is it misleading? So why might that weaken his argument? People who notice that these facts are not presented accurately, not presented something. So here's where I can't think of the word I want. I'm going to put it in parentheses, accurately. Might wonder about the rest of his information, right? So if you notice that somebody lies once or twice, are you going to question everything they say to you after that? Probably. So this is the same thing. He's kind of being a little shady about some of these facts. So it's going to make some of his readers, if they notice that he's being shady, that he might they might question, well, is this other stuff kind of shady? Like, what else do I need to doubt and question, right? So that is why these examples are doing what the topic sentence says. Got it? All right, and then it's a good idea to have a concluding idea at the end of your sentence. So here's something that we went over in my class today. We did it a couple weeks ago also. So what you want is one sentence at the end of the paragraph that kind of wraps up the paragraph, just puts a cap on it, I guess, or whatever. That would be at the bottom. Some things to avoid in that concluding idea. One thing that some people are taught in like their younger grades is to write a sentence that previews the next paragraph. To me, that always sounds a little weird. It sounds like you're introducing a brand new idea in that last sentence, and it always sounds awkward to me. So I would avoid that sentence that previews the next paragraph. The other thing you definitely want to avoid with your paragraph is ending on something specific, because that's going to feel like the paragraph just stopped. So those are the two things we're trying to avoid. Something that these work, but they're not the best, but they are better than this, right? So this is a little bit better. Your tie-in, depending on how specific it is, your tie-in for your last example might be able to do double duty as your concluding idea. The problem with that is that sometimes that tie-in is only related to the last example versus related to the whole paragraph. So it might sound a little off, but it's better than nothing, and it's better than here's my next paragraph. So that might work. The other thing that might work, if you can't think of anything else, is just restate the topic sentence, because a lot of times that's what that concluding idea is doing, is it's restating the topic sentence, but it's usually doing a little bit more than that. But if you at least restate the topic sentence, you have something there. All right. What you really want to try for in that concluding idea is a general sentence that wraps up the whole paragraph. So that's like it's restating the topic sentence because it's covering the same information. But usually in that concluding sentence, we want a little bit of a twist with like a so what. All right. So here's how he kind of keeps credibility, but here's how he loses credibility. So what? All right. And I think I have a note here. Yeah. Okay. So although on the surface, I might say Forbes here, Forbes evidence seems credible, a careful reader will probably distrust him after noticing his misleading facts. So it's repeating the idea that some of it's credible, some of it's misleading, but here's the so what, he might lose people's trust, which that's kind of in the topic sentence too. Yeah. Okay. So again, the process here, first thing you have to have is a strong topic sentence. If you haven't run your topic sentences by me yet and you want to, that's probably a good idea. After you have your topic sentence, you want to figure out what your examples or evidence will be. All right, so look at what you say you're going to talk about, evidence from credible sources, and then bring it in. All right. And here's my examples here. All right. If you can come up with a tie-in, like not the tie-in, the setup. The setup, another way to think about it is like a general introduction to the specific examples or evidence, right? So general, evidence from credible sources. Specific, here's the credible sources. General, some evidence is misleading. Specific, here it is. So it's the setup is usually something that's doing that, like a general sentence that introduces the specifics. Other things that eventually you might have as part of your setup might be a transition, might be an attributive tag. Those usually come up as you start drafting the paper. So if you can come up with a setup sentence or setup idea, that's great. And then again, what's really important is this tie-in, and you want to make sure you're not just repeating what the author says. You also want to make sure you're not agreeing or disagreeing. It's more about how they write and how effective those choices are. All right. One other thing to keep in mind as you're working on your outline is remember the purpose of an outline. It's for me to skim and see if you're on the right track. I generally am looking at the two big things like the focus. Do you have a clear focus for your paragraph and do you stick to it? And is there at least the potential to develop that paragraph fully? And those are the two main things I'm looking at when I check an outline. Because it's easier to fix things like that in an outline than it is once you start getting your draft done. So that's the process I would use to plan your evaluation paragraphs. If you start working on this, because this is going to be pretty challenging, it's new stuff. If you start working on it and you get stuck, remember to get in touch with me as soon as possible so that we can get you unstuck. All right. If there's something that you get stuck on one part, but you feel like you could work on another part, just write yourself a note in the part that you're stuck on. So, for example, if you can't think of a setup, you could say, I need help with this. Maybe do it in a different color or highlight it or something like that. And then that way you know what questions to ask me or I know what advice to give you. Okay, so I think that's everything on this evaluation paragraph. So then what you'll be working on after that is putting together all of it into this big, long plan. And that, again, that's going to be an optional check-in. Strongly recommended, but optional for the English 101 classes. And yeah, let me know if you need help. Okay, take care.